good evening and welcome to our Insight Into, and tonight we're very fortunate to have an insight into sports. So we've got two speakers tonight. In a moment I'm going to introduce you to Helen Moore, who was a student here not very long ago, and she's going to talk to you about her experiences in this area since leaving school and what she's up to and what her plans are next. And then we've also got a second speaker, Richard Wilkes, who's also a member of the school community. He had to have some children at the school, and he's going to be talking to you about his area of the profession, which is in sports management. At the moment, we're just trying to make sure we can connect to him. He's in the call, but we're just trying to make sure we can make his microphone work. So hopefully by the time we come to his part of the evening, that will all be fixed. So without further ado, I'm going to now hand over to Helen, who's going to talk to you about her recent experiences of studying and continuing to study in the field of sports. So welcome once again, and I will now hand over to Helen. Thank you.
Helen, sorry, you're on mute.
Hi, sorry. Yes, as Sarah mentioned, I was a pupil at the school and I'm now studying a research master's at Manchester Met, so just down the road from Manchester High. So if we go on to the next slide. So I thought just to start off with, I would explain what is sport and exercise science. So sport and exercise science is essentially the application of scientific principles to sport and exercise science scenarios. So if we just click on a couple. So sport and exercise science broadly consists of three main concepts. So the first area of focus is biomechanics. So this considers sort of physics of the human body. So this might be looking at movement or equipment. So you could be looking at the running pace and running movement of an elite runner, or you could be looking at how an elderly individual walks up and down the stairs. The second area is physiology. So this is kind of biology of the human body. This is the area where most of my research is focused. So this is looking at how the body responds to exercise, recovery, and nutrition. And then psychology is the final aspect. And this considers kind of behavior, mindset, and motivation in sporting contexts. Or there can be an interdisciplinary approach, so you can combine all three. And I think this is kind of where sports science is going, really. So not necessarily that one person has to have expertise in all three, but that different sports scientists are starting to work together to kind of combine their skills. So if we just move on to the next slide. So I did an undergraduate in sports science and I'm now doing a research master's. So just to explain a little bit, in my undergraduate, in my third year, I had the opportunity to complete a research project, and I decided to start looking into relative energy deficiency in sport, which I'll explain a little bit more in a second. And then I had the opportunity to develop this into a master's project, which I'm now working on. So my master's is essentially a little bit like a mini PhD, so it's a bit different than a taught master's. I haven't had any lectures whatsoever. I've just been given the last year or so to put together, collect data, and then kind of carry out the research project and write up as well. So just to go back to what is relative energy deficiency in sport, or REDS. First of all, I'm only going to give a very brief overview, don't worry. But first of all, you need to understand a concept called energy availability. So essentially, everything we eat in the day, our energy intake, is used in either our exercise of the day or for essential processes that keep us alive. So the energy that's left over after exercise is what we would term our energy availability. So if we just move on to the next slide. But if our exercise increases or our energy intake decreases, this means that energy availability that we have is a little bit lower than it should be. And so certain things in the body have to sort of slow down a little bit, and we can end up with health and performance consequences that essentially lead to REDS, or relative energy deficiency in sport. So for my undergraduate project, I looked at how prevalent this was in female climbers. So if we just move on a couple. And then for my master's, I've developed this to just look into recreationally active women. And then if we just go on to the next slide. But I just wanted to give you a feel for kind of how broad sports science can be. So in the office that I work in, there is such a range of kind of skills and interests. So for example, one of the PhD students is looking at a very sort of clinical population. So in the top left corner here, you can see she's looking at time restricted eating and how this could maybe help improve pre-diabetes, so type 2 diabetes. There's then a couple of psychologists in the room. So one of them is looking at how confidence in a prosthetic hand can affect eye tracking and how efficiently someone can complete a movement. So that's been quite a fun one because I got to have a go with a prosthetic hand. It's actually really hard work. Then another psychologist is looking at dyspraxia in children and how the sort of muscle-mind connection affects their movement. And then my supervisor is looking a little bit more at the sort of elite sport end of things. So she does a lot of work in genetics. So has been looking at whether there are certain genes that elite athletes maybe possess. For example, this sort of Twitter post shows that they were looking at whether rugby players have specific injury protective genes. Or you can see at the bottom here, she also kind of alongside her research is working as a sports scientist with the England blind and deaf women's football team. So she gets to sort of travel the world with them. So sports science is a really broad area. So it goes all the way from clinical to the elite level performers. So if we just move on to the next slide, please. So what does research actually involve? So what do I do on a day-to-day basis? So first of all, when I set out to do my research project, I had to go to the university and say, this is what I want to research, and this is why I want to research it. So I did a lot of reading around the topic. If you like learning, research is a really good way to kind of continue that learning process. So it's a lot more independent than kind of school or university, really. But you're going around and you're kind of topping up your knowledge and finding out where the gaps in the knowledge are. And that's where you try and create your research project. Then you move on to the maybe slightly less interesting, sort of less glamorous part, which is completing your ethics. So this bit is just, you have to go to a board that say, yes, what the research you wanted to do is not going to harm anyone. It kind of has a sensible purpose and can be a benefit to people. Then I could start collecting, recruiting participants. So I'm bringing people into the lab. So I went out and looked for people that wanted to take part and wanted to get involved. And then the bit that I think is most interesting and most exciting was the data collection. So this was when I brought real people into the lab. So I went out kind of onto the street, as it were, and brought people in. And through this, I got to learn a load of different techniques. So I had people running on the treadmill with a mask on, which would measure the oxygen they breathe in and the carbon dioxide they breathe out, and be looking at how much oxygen can they breathe in when they're running at full maximal effort, so really running to exhaustion. I also looked at things like their muscle strength. I learned how to assess their bone health, and a couple of skills that I really didn't kind of anticipate getting to learn, but again can all fall under sports science are I'm now able to take blood samples from people and use a cannula, and kind of then going into the lab with your lab coat in sort of more typical labs and analysing those samples and things. So it really is quite varied. Then you move on to kind of analysing that data. So this is a little bit more sort of back at your laptop, going through it with Excel and kind of different software that sort of tells you which are the important findings. Then it's a process of writing all of that up and trying to get it published. So you're not doing research just for research's sake. You want to get it out there and you want other people to be able to see the research so that you can benefit people and that it can have a really positive impact, hopefully. So, for example, with my research, I'm hoping that if I can get something published, it can help people understand REDs in recreationally active women more, and with more understanding, then hopefully we can avoid it and we can learn how to deal with it better. And then finally have the opportunity hopefully to go to conferences. So far I've only been and attended these, but hopefully at other ones I'll be presenting my research. So a conference is essentially where lots of researchers get together and discuss the research they're doing. They have the opportunity to kind of learn from each other, and you can sort of collaborate with other researchers, get to meet other researchers. So you get to kind of learn new ideas, hopefully meet new people. I was quite excited when I last went to a conference. I got to meet a famous climber, so that was quite exciting for me, and hopefully go to cool places. So for example, I'm hoping that in summer I might be able to go to Paris to present my research. So essentially no 2 days are really the same, and there's quite a lot of variety with research, which makes it really exciting. So if we just go on to the next slide, please. So then I thought, now that you've got a bit of an understanding of what sports science is, I would just kind of take it back a little bit and talk about kind of how I've got to where I am, and any sort of tips in case you were interested in at least sort of taking on a sports science degree, even if it's not going all the way through into kind of research. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So like I say, I was at Manchester High from year 7 to the end of sixth form. So I did my GCSEs and my A-levels at Man High. So for GCSE, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do, but I just picked some subjects that I enjoyed. So it's quite kind of structured with recommended subjects and subjects that you should be doing. So it was quite easy just to sort of pick the ones I enjoyed, but I've shown the ones there on the slide that I did do. And then getting towards A-level, I was starting to find out a bit more about where my interests were, but I still didn't have a clue what I was going to go and do at university or what I was going to do as a career. So again, I just picked some subjects I enjoyed. But actually, I think these subjects ended up being really useful for a sports science degree. So I did biology, psychology and PE, and I did chemistry as an AS level. So if we just go on to the next slide, please. So I've just listed here some of the subjects that I think are probably the most useful for sports science. So when it may have changed a little bit since I applied, but when I applied, most courses asked for at least one science. So everyone that comes into a sports science course can be coming into it with quite a variety of different kind of starting levels of knowledge. But I think the 3 subjects I had, so PE, biology and psychology, were a really good foundation because they kind of covered 3 core bases. So PE obviously has a little bit of biomechanics, physiology and psychology in it already. But even the biology and the psychology, although they're not specifically sport focused when you're doing your A-levels, the kind of principles behind them are still the same and gave me a really good foundation. Chemistry, I think, can be a useful one, and it does qualify as a science that would get you onto a sports science course, but I think has maybe been less relevant to me. If you were starting to go a little bit more down the nutrition route, I can see that it maybe would be a bit more useful there. But if I was picking subjects purely on kind of how useful they are, I maybe would have selected kind of physics or maths as that additional AS level. You by no means have to be a mathematician to do sports science, or even to kind of get to higher levels of sports science, sort of masters and PhD. You can kind of very much sort of learn the maths you need as and when you need it. But it's definitely would be a useful sort of foundation, so you could just pick the maths up a little bit quicker. And again, physics obviously is a key bit that underpins that kind of biomechanics section. But at the end of the day, if you're not 100% sure what you want to do, or even if you do know that you'd quite like to go into sports science, I would say you've got to do these subjects for 2 years, and whichever subjects you pick are probably going to be very similar to the degree that they kind of support. So I would say always make sure that you pick subjects that you enjoy. So if we just move on to the next, if we just click. Yeah, so there's no point say, for example, if you were to study geography because you felt you had to study geography, that's then going to be useful for a course which is very geography related. So just pick subjects you enjoy, and if you don't know what you want to do, you'll kind of work it out along the way. Because yeah, I didn't know about applying for a BSc in sports science until sort of the very last bit of A levels. So in terms of going to university, I first of all I went to Bath University, and I was there for a term and then I dropped out, which was definitely not what I planned to do. But I came back at Christmas holidays, and in all honesty was just kind of dreading going back and thought, hang on a minute, something's not right here. So I had gone to do sports science, but I decided in that moment that there was no point sticking with something that wasn't making me happy, and I didn't really have a plan, but I decided to drop out. It wasn't much later that I then did apply to do a sports science course again at MMU, but because the UCAS deadline was coming up quite quickly. But even then, I kind of still wasn't 100% sure, but I kind of had some time out, did a part-time job, kind of decided what I wanted to do. And MMU was an opportunity to do a very similar course, but a little bit closer to home, so there was just a little bit less pressure. And actually, I think dropping out and changing courses is one of the best decisions I've probably ever made. So one of the key things that it's taught me, and that I kind of want to emphasize, is that there is no one defined path. So if you decide that you get to university and it's not quite right, it's okay to change your mind. If you decide that you need a year out before you even get to university, again, that's absolutely fine. Or you might just decide that university isn't for you, but just make sure you pick the right choice for yourself. And kind of linking into that, I would say when you're looking at universities, don't be too distracted by the league tables and the red brick universities. So when I first applied for university, I didn't even consider MMU just because its name didn't pop up on the sort of top 10 in the league tables. But actually the sort of teaching support and the opportunities I've had there have been brilliant, and I've had such a good time at university. So I really strongly believe that the best university is the best one for you, because if you're happy there and you're confident there, that's when you'll be able to kind of develop better, and you'll get the better grades and go on to do better things essentially. I also realized that you don't have to be, oh sorry, if we just go back a second. I also realized you don't have to be miles from home to have independence and have a good time at uni. So when you're choosing unis, obviously pick the ones you enjoy, but don't dismiss the ones that are close to home, because I did live away when I was doing my undergraduate in Manchester, and I still felt equally, if not more, independent than when I was in Bath. So if you want to move away, that's absolutely fine, but just don't dismiss those ones close to home. And then kind of more specifically to the sports science, have a look at the course content. So sports science is quite a broad area. For example, you can see that kind of psychology and biomechanics can be quite different, but also some sports science courses will involve other bits. So they'll include things such as sociology, or there'll be a little bit more coaching and things. So just really have a look at which course you want to do. So for example, the ones I chose, I really liked because they were very focused on that science element. But if you're thinking, oh, I might be a bit interested in that coaching side, there'll be courses where you get the opportunity to pick that as an optional module further down the line if you wanted to. So if we just move on to the next one. And then I thought I'd just give you kind of a few tips for when you're at university. So I think that the reason I'm in the position I'm in now with my research masters is definitely because I made a good impression with the lecturers during my undergraduate. So make sure when you're at university, go to the lectures and show your face, because you can't make a good impression on people and they won't know who you are unless you're there and they can kind of put a face to the name. Also, pay attention in the lectures and pay attention to detail. So especially as now I'm kind of moving into that less student-y position and kind of being around the tutors more and things, you realise that there is nothing more frustrating than when someone submits an assignment and they've not proofread it, or they've not put the kind of units in right, or things like that. So just all those little things show that you care and show that you're really interested. And don't be afraid to ask for help. I must have emailed my lecturers all the time. I probably really annoyed them, the amount that I emailed them during my undergraduate, but it showed that I was keen to learn. And again, it meant that they knew who I was, they knew I was interested, and they're normally happy to help you. Just don't be the person that emails them the night before the deadline asking what the assignment is, because that will have the complete opposite effect. So yeah, just really get to know your lecturers, because they'll be the ones that are saying to you, oh, you should come and do this master's, or I've got this PhD that you should sign up for. But alongside that, don't forget to get involved in other things as well. So kind of as cheesy as it sounds, university is about more than just that kind of academic side and the degree. And it's definitely about kind of building your confidence. And I think all of the additional things that you can do alongside it, they're the sort of things that, again, have helped me to get the master's position that I've got and potentially be offered the opportunity to sign up for PhDs. And you'll just get some opportunities that you won't get at any other point in your life. So you'll get some of the cheapest holidays you could do, and have the opportunity to make friends, which again will make a really big difference to your university experience. So if we just move on, I think we're almost done. So yeah, so then what are my plans next? In all honesty, I don't really know. I've got a few ideas, kind of thinking about PhDs, but also thinking about kind of primary school teaching, so very different. Essentially, what I was saying before, again, it doesn't matter if you don't 100% know what you want to do, just keep choosing stuff you enjoy, and that's at least what I'm aiming to do. And hopefully if you're just always doing something you're enjoying, then that's fine. So if we just move on to the next one. And so I just wanted to put up here a couple of sort of useful resources if anyone is interested in sport and exercise science. So the first one is the British Association of Sport and Exercise Scientists. So if you look on there, it'll tell you a bit more about what it is and what the sort of jobs you can get are, and there'll be a bit of information about probably courses and things. And again, I just googled sport and exercise science, and it came up with a complete university guide that was sort of talking about what a degree can involve. There are more and more sports science degrees coming out now. So I think when I applied, it was kind of, I could do coaching or sports science, but now there's so many. You can do kind of exercise and health science. You can do so many different, I'm not even sure, but at least at my university, there's now probably at least twice, if not 3 times as many undergraduate sport courses. And in the bottom left corner, I have just put my email. So if anyone ever had any questions or wanted to know anything about kind of what I'm up to, or just questions about applying for uni, feel free to drop me an email. Also, the Twitter is my kind of research Twitter account. So if anyone was interested in sort of seeing what I get up to from a kind of research academic perspective, that's a good place to keep in touch. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Helen. It was really, really interesting. My area of sort of teaching specialism is English, so I don't really know very much about that. And that's what I really love about these events, is finding out about all the different things that are available out there, and particularly when it's our students, obviously, that have done that. And in Helen's case, a student I remember when she was a student at school here as well. So some brilliant ideas there, things relating to university. So those of you that are considering, you know, relatively soon going off to university, or at some point in the future going to university, some of that advice there was really useful, particularly the things about, you know, you don't always have to travel far away. You can stay at home and still have a really good experience, as Helen said. And also I love that on the slide about, you know, things to university, go to lectures. Yes, that is something that's really good to do, just to kind of get involved, really to get involved, to get the most out of the experience. So loads of brilliant advice there about going to university, whatever course you end up doing. And of course, whatever career you go into, getting involved as well. It's not just about what you do at university, it's about here at school. And if you've got voluntary work or a job that you do as well, just really getting involved, and networking is so important, which obviously is something that Helen has really taken advantage of and done very, very well. And is going to continue to do. And I know that she comes into school sometimes and speaks to the PE staff here. So thank you so much for that, and also for sharing those details. If anyone wants to ask a question or would like a little bit more information, if you just want to pop questions in the Q&A, we can address those at a slightly later point of the evening. And I'm now going to introduce our next speaker, who, as I mentioned before, is a current parent at the school. And he also works in this area of sports management, as you can see from the slide. So he's going to give us his insights into his particular area of this really fascinating subject. So thank you very much, Richard, for joining us. And I will now hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you hear me first and foremost? That is the best news. That's been the most anxious wait for 20 minutes because my microphone wasn't working before we started and you jumped straight into it. So that is a huge relief. As Sarah said, I'm not a former student. And unlike Helen, thank you for that previous talk. I'm not wild on technical aspects and presentations are not particularly my speciality. However, talking about myself for 20 minutes is not uncharted territory, so we should be fine. I've currently got daughters Lola in year 10, Frankie in year 8 and Bella in year 4. And not just because she's on the call, but Sarah Newman has been a fantastic support, as is Sarah Rowley and all the PE staff, in encouraging my daughters to not only participate but also work hard at school, because if they don't, they're not allowed to play sport, and they've been very good at encouraging that messaging collectively. So right, I haven't got a presentation, but I have got a little bit of background which I'm been asked to share. So I basically graduated from Newcastle University in 1999. I did a degree in economics and management, which is wholly unrelated to what I then went on to do, which was join Sale Sharks as a professional rugby player, which I did from 1999 until about 2002, at which point I joined Oral Rugby Club for a couple of years, and then moved down to London. Whilst I was playing rugby at Sale, I started working as a consultant for James Chapman and Company, a law firm whose kind of headline client was Manchester United, but they had a specific commercial department that worked in sport largely. So sport was one of the main tenets of what they did, and I went as a consultant to work in that department, getting a reasonable grasp of contract law, little else to do with law, but the main parts I needed in terms of being an agent or working as a consultant were around contracts. So they force fed me the contractual element and commercial element. In 2005, I moved down to London and joined what was quite a large sports agency at the time called SFX. So their headline clients at the time, many of the girls will be far too young to remember them unless they watched Match of the Day, were people like Gary Lineker, Michael Owen, David Gower, Will Carling, a real who's who of late 80s, 90s kind of sporting superstars. David Beckham was their big headline client, and they let me nowhere near any of those people, but I was allowed to be an assistant in the rugby division, and that's when I really started cutting my teeth as an agent as opposed to a consultant at a law firm. So basically working as an agent or a jobbing agent, as I was lower down the food chain at a sports agency, was a great grounding. You learn a huge amount about photocopiers, making cups of tea, and occasionally being allowed to do a deal or two. So basically 2005 moved down there and spent 2 years building up my rugby portfolio, so to speak, of clients. And then in 2007, SFX got taken over globally by a company called Wasserman Media Group, who are still in existence, are one of the biggest agencies in American sports, so American football, basketball and baseball, and they took over SFX as our European business, primarily focusing in football and in rugby. And at that stage, I became a director of that company, heading up the rugby division. So what did I learn from being at a huge global sports agency? I learned that going on trip to Los Angeles, which all expenses paid by Wasserman Media Group, were great, and you learn that the sports industry at this stage in late mid 2000s was a long way behind where American sports were. American sports had hugely diversified their marketing and their fan experience and all the things that we now take a bit more for granted in this country with Premier League football, but in this country we're miles behind. So I spent a number of trips to America, not just because they paid for them, but also trying to get a breadth of knowledge in terms of what do the American sports do better? And I think broadly speaking, they made it a fan engagement and an actual experiential thing, as opposed to just the sport. I think in this country, we have a tendency to make the sport very pure, very kind of driven about the sport, and less so about the experience of going to the sport. In order to do that, I was very fortunate that I got to not only experience working in the American office, but also going to experience the sports. So if you ever go to baseball, every single and don't quote it, every innings is greeted with a different snack and a different drink, and it's traditional to have it, which is an incredible experience. After every single innings, they bring you the next snack that you expected to eat, or you go and buy it from the store. So quite a big learning for me in terms of the contrasting between the sort of the global sports industry and where it is, and came back and was based in London. And in 2008, I decided to do the three things that I think are most stressful in the world, all in the space of about 6 months. So Lola, my first daughter, was born. I moved house from London to Manchester, and I set my own business up. Looking back, I don't think I would choose to necessarily do all three in the space of 6 months. But at the time I was young and full of energy and just cracked on. So I established Green Room Sports Management in 2008. And basically that was branching out. I decided that working for a large multinational American company was great, but actually I wanted to do it for myself, to have some drive to actually I probably wrongly thought I knew everything I needed to know at that stage, and to actually build my own business and take responsibility for what I was doing and crack on. So I set up Green Room Sports Management. The reason it's called Green Room is, for those that are familiar with television, we also set up a hospitality agency at the same time, also hospitality company, where we had hospitality at Twickenham, and we called it the Green Room because the idea behind it was that we would get lots of celebrities to come in, as well as rugby fans, to experience the day, which was brilliant. So we basically started off the company, Googled who had a passing interest in rugby, cross-referenced it to who we wanted to meet, and invited them to come, and it was quite successful. So we had Daniel Craig in there, Jeremy Clarkson, list of various people that we decided to come. Johnny Vaughan, who we invited once and turned up every single time we had an event, whether he'd been invited or not, until we asked him to stop coming, just like free food and drink, it would appear. But set up the business, and I had to learn fairly quickly on the hoof how to manage a company, how to produce a set of accounts with an accountant, the cash flow, all the things in terms of running a business that I didn't know previously from being an agent. And then the body of my work was negotiating club contracts for players. So I looked after and managed the I suppose the contractual and the management of about 50 players, Premiership players, and about, at that stage, 7 of the England squad of about 25. So I managed to build it up fairly successfully, fairly quickly from Wasserman. Took all my clients with me, and the body of the work is basically acting as an agent in terms of negotiating employment contracts, and for the select few that are good enough, negotiating their commercial contracts. I think the same is true of rugby as it is in football. 95% of the Premier League footballers wouldn't have a huge commercial earning. It's only the top 2 or 3 that would do, or top 5, top few in each club. And negotiating the commercial contracts is probably the icing on the cake, both for the player and for the agency. You can't rely on it necessarily as your main source of income, but if they come along, they can be quite lucrative. and dare I say it, a little bit more interesting. So we did commercial contracts, we had partnerships with Adidas, Red Bull, Nike, Land Rover, BMW, Mitsubishi, the kind of British Airways, Turkish Airways, Virgin Airways. So a lot of blue chip companies are involved in rugby, and we would look to leverage the players on an individual basis with those companies, which is probably the more glamorous side of it. Going to Rotherham on a Tuesday evening to negotiate the contract of a 22-year-old was slightly less glamorous, but it was all part of being an agent. And establishing things like their image rights, making sure their image rights are robust, which is where you carve out the individual's ability to leverage money from their image as opposed to them being a sportsman specifically on the pitch, and the sort of the nuances of how that works. For a little while I became, I wouldn't say an expert, but at least well versed in the use of image rights, certainly in rugby union, and how we can push through and use those. And in 2019, when COVID hit rugby union, all sports obviously took a break, as did rugby union, along with I know, all the professional sports took a break, and unfortunately, all the professional sport clubs, or certain rugby union clubs, also took a break in paying agents' fees. So I got contacted by Leicester Tigers. I had been the agent of Steve Borthwick, who had gone in there, who's just gone to be England coach, but had gone in there as head coach. And I went in to do a restructuring of their salary cap in 2019. And more importantly, because they were very kindly going to pay me the money that was sat in held up fees, and therefore I could pay Manchester High my daughter's school fees. So it was a needs must. But I actually enjoyed the role so much that I've now been there for 2 years. So good things came out of COVID, and the school got paid. So it was, I went in, broadly speaking, to restructure the salary cap and to try and take the team to be successful. So Leicester Tigers, I'm not sure many of the girls will have a huge knowledge of rugby, but they're the equivalent of Manchester United in football. So they've been the biggest club in the country and one of the biggest clubs in Europe for a number of years. We have 26,000 people coming to watch on Saturday. We've got 26,000 seat a stadium. I think the average crowd in the Premiership is about 9. So we're at least double, if not triple, the size of most of the clubs. Unfortunately, being the biggest club in the country hadn't led to being successful, because they were currently languishing in 11th on the pitch when I arrived. And so we quickly set about using the money that was in a salary cap sport. So sorry for jumping around. Salary cap means you have a limit on what you're allowed to spend. So it's meant to it's meant to mean that all clubs spend the same amount of money. So there's a level playing field, so the level of competition should increase. There are ways around the salary cap, and there are ways of being creative or spending that salary cap better. But it's the point of it is to breed competition, so you don't have the same team winning each year. Conversely, the person in charge of the salary cap, which is me, is trying to breed success, so you do win every year. So it's a slight juxtaposition. And within 4 weeks of arriving at Leicester, they were hit with a salary cap investigation. So that was excellent. So I had to lead the investigation into breaches of salary cap, which we did for 3 months, and cleared our name and paid a small fine and accepted the slap on the wrist. But the main body of my job for the first year was restructuring the salary cap spend. The salary cap was fixed at 6.4 million, but with the additions of credits you get for developing your own players and having international players, we were operating at about £7 to £8 million. So I was responsible for the £8 million spend, which is a lot in rugby. It's not a lot in Premier League football terms, to try and make that spend better. So at the end of my first season, we had finished 6th and reached the European Challenge Cup final, which is the equivalent of the UEFA Cup in old money for football fans, and lost. And then in my second year, we did some more changing of cap spend and won the Premiership. So it's the first time that Leicester had won it in 10 years. And I think not due entirely to me, but we just had better players on the pitch. So I'd spent most of my time negotiating contracts instead of being an agent, poacher turned gamekeeper, negotiating contracts on behalf of the club, and getting rid of people, unfortunately. So we released 27 players in my first year, and we signed 17 just to try and make the structure of the squad. So they couldn't. So my role has now changed to broadly being speaking a sporting director in Premier League football nuance, sort of terminology. So I'm responsible for all the structuring at the club, from academy, which is under 15s, all the way up to the first team. So we've got several World Cup winners in our first team squad, and we go down to an academy at 15-year-olds. And I'm responsible for all of the structuring, all of the contracting, all of the scouting, and making sure that the pipeline of development means that the players and the club can be successful for the next 3, 4, 5 years and beyond. Our journey took a little bit of a bump in the road 6 weeks ago, when Eddie Jones got sacked by England, and England decided they wanted Steve Borthwick, who was our head coach, as their head coach. And they wanted Kevin Sinfield, who some of you will have heard for his fundraising exploits, who I had brought into the club 12 months previously, and our other 2 coaches. And so they took our entire coaching group and put them as England coaching group. So I was responsible for the negotiations around the release and the compensation with the RFU. And I'm currently, the reason I was a little bit late on the call, I'm currently interviewing for our next head coach and coaching team in order to put them in place. So it's been a change of role, but quite interesting. And then in terms of what my next step is, we have a 3-year plan at the club in order for me to take over from the current chief executive, who is a lady by the name of Andrea Pinchin. And as I mentioned on the briefing call for this, you should probably have her on rather than me, because she's inspiring, organised, female, and is an absolutely wonderful boss to work for. The skills she has are not rugby related. She runs the biggest rugby club in the country, but she'll be the first to admit that she knows not next to nothing, but almost next to nothing about rugby. But her ability to engage with 7-foot rugby players down to people in the ticket office is better than anyone I've ever seen. She's a wonderful manager, wonderful chief exec, but I've told her that within 3 years I want her job or I'll leave. So we've agreed that. So I'm currently moving through to be hopefully take over from her. In order to do that, I did a master's in 2018 to keep my education, or rather try and complement my education, and to keep learning in terms of what I wanted to do. In terms of how do I get into sport, or how did you get into sport, how do you get into sport? Some of the key qualities that I think you need are not exclusive to sport, and my daughters will tell you that I bang on about it all the time, but it really does come down to hard work. You know, the phrase is, the harder I work, the luckier I get. It's true. You genuinely, whatever you want to get into, you need to work hard. I think the sporting industry is one that's really growing. It's really exciting. Women's sport in particular is a huge growth area, massive. There's massive potential in this country to grow that. I took our 3 girls to watch Man United against Man City, and I'm a City fan, a couple of years ago. We went to watch it at the Etihad when they had it, and it was 27,000, maybe more there. And it was a brilliant spectacle. And the thing I noticed most, which I took away and enjoyed, was there was no diving, literally no diving. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The female players wanted to not dive and wanted to not roll around on the floor. As a fun experience, it was incredible. I think they need to grow on that. But one of the key qualities you need in terms of getting into sport, like any other industry, is just working hard. If you want to work in sport, because lots of people want to work in sport, you need to you need to be committed to it. You need to knock on a lot of doors. The thing I would say in terms of how do you get a foothold in, knock on lots of doors, get lots of work experience. I started working at the law firm way back when as a consultant, because I just wanted to do something other than being a rugby player. So I offered my services to my agent at the time, who was a lawyer, for nothing. Went in, hung around enough that actually gave me an opportunity. You need to knock on a lot of doors and build up your network. Building up a network is absolutely key. Qualifications are really important, but actually very much if the sport industry in particular, it's willing to work hard, willing to knock on doors, and willing to remember people and keep and basically build your network. They will be some of the key things in terms of getting into professional sport or sport at that kind of professional end. I'm trying to think what else. Unlike Helen, I didn't prepare any slides. So they would be the key takeaways. Sarah, do you want me to speak any more? Can I pause for breath? What I did offer is to do questions as much as you like, so at least that will prompt my thinking.
Brilliant. I think looking at this, am I live? Can people hear me now? I think
you are live.
Fantastic. Brilliant. That was really fascinating, really informative. Thank you. I'm just going to click something away from my screen. Thank you so much. That was really fascinating. And hearing from somebody who's worked in the industry, worked your way up through the industry, using your nous, your qualifications, your skills, your interests, your flexibility, all of those skills you mentioned, a lot of the skills that make people successful in this industry are skills that might make people successful in any industry. And clearly you went that route and have now, with your sporting background, your own sporting background, got into that area. But you can equally see how that kind of tenacity and interest and passion could have taken you in so many different directions. So it's absolutely brilliant. A couple of things that I just wanted to note. Love the point about the diving. I watch football, not to be too gendered and traditional and stereotypical about it, but the men in my house watch the football and I look at it and I think, why are these men rolling on the floor? Get up and play football. Whereas, yeah, when you watch the women playing football, they tend not to roll around. They just get up and play the sport. Anyway, that's me being slightly facetious. I apologise. Also, I spent a long time in the States and I'm not massively a sports fan myself. I'm very happy to watch it. I don't have a huge kind of emotional investment with it or a kind of personal feeling for it. I see the value of it, of course. When I lived in the US, I would go sometimes as entertainment to watch sporting events. I loved going to basketball matches. I loved going to baseball matches because they were events. They had characters. You got to know the people. And I was there in the 80s and the 90s, and I can still kind of rattle off some of the comments, particularly from the basketball commentators, as you watch these matches being played. The seventh inning stretch at baseball when they play games and things like that. And what you said really struck me as I find that is possibly a bit lacking in English sport. I'm sure it's come a long way. It has come a long way, but I still don't. I think that is something, and it's interesting that you kind of mentioned that as your experience with merging with this big US agency or business. That was something that you took away when you went, across the pond to look at how they were managing things there. So, but so many different aspects of your career are really, really useful pieces of information and advice to our students. On the back of Helen's talk about the earlier stages of her career, which is all about the sort of qualification and research side of things. So, two very, very different approaches and very different experiences. And the other thing I'll say, just before I then hand over to Sarah Newman, who's going to say a little bit about some courses and things like that you might want to do if you're interested, is that, I can't remember it. It's gone completely out of my head. So I'll leave that for now. I had a note of something and I can't see it there. So I'm going to hand over now to Sarah Newman, one of our careers teachers, and also head of PE here at the school, to talk a little bit about maybe some courses that might be of interest and routes in. So I'll hand over to Sarah. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. I better check, nobody here? Yep, brilliant. Okay, so I thought I'd sort of give three completely different courses that I've sort of had a look through that are available to students nowadays as they're going on to start their careers. As Helen mentioned, the sports courses that you can get at university or go and do at university now developed considerably in the last 5 to 10 years, and ridiculously in comparison to when I started out and was looking at university courses for myself. I think for me at the time, the three options were probably physio, a PE teacher, or go into the forces. I think if you were a sporty, that was about it. So I've had a look and there are some really, really exciting things out there. some of them you may have thought of before, some of them might be completely different. I've tried to make them slightly different to what Helen's talked about and also what Richard has. So the first one I've had a look at is psychology and sport exercise science. And it's available at, the course is available at a lot of universities, but I had a look at Manchester, Newcastle and Exeter in particular. And if it's something you would be interested in terms of entry requirements, you're looking at 3 A's or 2 A's and a B. And it's a course where they prefer you to have 2 sciences at A level, but those sciences can be for a range of different areas: psychology, biology, chemistry, physics, statistics and maths. And the idea behind the course is looking at improving an individual's physical and mental health and well-being. Specifically, they look at how the mind affects the body. And if you were to do this course, you'd be looking at how to help an athlete deliver better sporting performances and results. And within your course, which I think sounds really interesting, but you get to have a look at things like neuroscience and look into different research projects. You'd have knowledge about diversity and inclusion in sport, law, sporting regulations and ethical issues, which would be associated with working as a sports exercise psychologist, human physiology and cognitive psychology. So there's a real range within that course of things you can, real interest, I think. From that, looking at careers from it, obviously you can work within a sports team or a club or individual athletes, but others have gone on to do a master's or a PhD, and then moving away slightly, even though you've done a psychology with sport, they've moved away and looked at things like clinical psychology, forensic psychology and educational. So lots of different sort of strands to that. So that's one of the courses I've had a look at. Another one is nutrition and exercise science. And this is, again, offered at quite a different range of universities. You've got Newcastle, Manchester, Chester and UCLan, but there are others as well. Again, entry requirements would be AAB. Within this, you'll cover exercise physiology, nutrition, health psychology, biomechanics and public health. So it covers, again, a real range of different things. And looking into it careers wise, working within professional sports clubs, or also looking at trying to get into UK institutes of sport or health services. And there's also obviously opportunities for research development, becoming a sports nutritionist, if that's something you're interested in, product development or quality assurance in food industry, and medical research council. So that was the second one. But the third one is the one that I think is a particularly relatively new industry, and it's one that's really sort of taking off, and that's sports engineering. Previously, if you were interested in doing any sports engineering, you'd have to do a mechanical engineering degree first before you could then go and specialise in the sports side of it. Now, though, you can go straight to a sports engineering course, and this is offered at Newcastle, Loughborough, Strathclyde, Nottingham. Maths A level is required, most of those, and it's ABB is the entry requirements. And what you'd be looking at and what you'd be sort of working towards with sports engineering is you'd be looking to help solve problems associated with sports, health and exercise. And at the moment, it's attracting large interest and investment from professional sports clubs, sportswear, equipment manufacturers, as well as health and wellbeing apps and wearable technology developers. It's a huge, huge area. You'd be looking at basically working towards how you might work out what the next wire for a particular racket for the ball, making contact with it, or it could be making VR animation of how a new bat would react to different balls. There's so many different strands to sports engineering. And as a career with all of these 3 different courses, but specifically the sports engineering, you'll have a direct impact on the life of an athlete and the equipment they might be using or wearing. So they're the 3 courses I've looked up. So I don't know if anybody's got any questions on any of those, or Mrs. Norton wants to say anything.
Hello, here I am. Hi, thank you. So yes, yeah, Richard, I think, has got something he wants to say in a mo. I'll cross over to him. But that was brilliant, really, really useful. 3 very, very different degrees in that area. And I think you're right, the development area of things like, nutrition and engineering and all of those, how to maximize potential, how to maximize skills, how to maximize output, but also the things that people don't necessarily think about being related to sport. You know, you were mentioning things like strings in rackets or some of the technology around that, but maybe it's to do with, you know, football boots or equipment, you know, saddles on horses. There is a whole range of kind of equipment that's used, and technology and engineering and science are really advancing. So, you know, working in those areas. And the other thing I was going to say as well earlier is about if you want to work, for example, in the sports area, but the sports field, but you're not necessarily a sporting person yourself, big organisations of the sort that Richard perhaps has set up himself or has worked for require lots of other people to work in different departments. You know, you'll have things like legal departments, HR departments, marketing departments, all these sorts of background departments, technology, payroll, where people are needed, skilled people are needed, and you can go into working in this business and perhaps work in this environment without necessarily being an athlete or a sports person yourself, because you have skills in other areas and you happen to end up working in a business like that. So if you're interested in that, that's another way to do it. And that's something we've mentioned with various other career areas. For example, we were looking at, I remember when we were talking about arts and theatre and drama and performance, and actually you can go and work in a theatre and not be an actor and do other sides to that profession. So there are lots of different routes in, there are lots of different outcomes, lots of different careers available. If you have any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A now, and I can address those to the speakers. But I think I might be right that Richard was wanting to say something. Is that true?
Can you hear me? It's only because I've been quiet for quite a long time for me, and it's burning at the back of my throat to speak. But no, it was just to both of Sarah's point. We have 2 full-time sports psychologists that work with us, so they work full-time with the players and the coaches. So very clever people, one of whom previously worked with Arsene Wenger at Arsenal for 10 years and then came to us, so he's pretty luminary. The sports engineering piece is a huge growing element of the game, trying to find the next kind of competitive advantage in lots of things. In rugby in particular, we have an issue with concussion, with brain traumas and head injuries that needs addressing. The amount of technology and engineering that they're putting into that to solve a medical problem is huge. So we've now produced gum shields that basically have a monitor the size of the impact, so they can monitor every single impact a player has in a game, and once they go above a certain level, they get taken off the pitch because they're not able to continue. So the engineering aspect is huge. One element I didn't mention, which actually is remiss of me, but has become a huge part of what I do now, is the analytical data that's driven around sport. So with the increasing amount of engineering, the wearable tech, every player wears GPS, every player wears a gum shield. We collate all of that information, and then the analytical and statistical sort of algorithms that are built in order to process that information and work out who's doing well well has become huge. It's a massive part of sport. They call it Moneyball, but sort of how you drive finance through optimal performance. But it's so, as you've just said, Sarah, in terms of you don't have to be actually on the pitch to contribute. The 2 guys that contribute hugely behind the scene at Leicester clearly have never ever stepped foot on a rugby field, but one of them was head of statistical data for The Economist previously, and the other ran a hedge fund in London. 2 of the brightest guys I've ever met, but they are a hugely integral part of what we do every single day in terms of formulating the game plan because of their ability to algorithm around the statistical data. So yeah, it's just, there are many routes into working in sport, not just on the pitch.
Yeah, and I also would just say, sorry, can you hear me? Hi, also, yeah, sorry, I would also just say, like, there's other routes into kind of working in the sports industry, like you say, kind of completely different aspects. But even if you're thinking of doing kind of sport and exercise science, don't be intimidated because you don't feel like you're an elite athlete. Most of the people on the course, I would say, probably weren't elite or high level sports people. I definitely wasn't. Like, I enjoyed a little bit of everything, but you don't need to be a good sports person to be a really good sports scientist.
Brilliant. Oh, thank you so much. And the one other area I was just thinking of is sports journalism, which is, you know, a huge area. And if you like the sort of, if you're interested in it as a maybe a practical thing, but also a theoretical concept, and you like analysing it and writing about it and talking about it and meeting various sports people and looking at it in a cultural context, a historical context, sports journalism is another area. And there are journalism courses and sports journalism courses specifically. And again, that's a case of, you know, just doing some local work, kind of grassroots, you even starting in school, writing about sports fixtures even at school for our very own bulletin. There you go, there's a nice career starting point for you. So there are loads of different routes in and obviously lots of different areas. I'd like to thank both of our speakers tonight, Helen and Richard, for coming and joining us. I think they've given us two quite different sort of ends of the spectrum and different ways in and different experiences and different ideas about opportunities. And you can see the information on the screen there. I hope if you want to get in contact and have any further questions or anything else that you'd like to know about, you can contact us via that website address there, that email address there on the screen. And if without any sort of further ado, I'm just going to close this evening by saying thank you so much. I've learned a great deal, as I always do. It's always really, really fascinating. Thank you to Sarah as well for talking about those courses. And if you're, you know, the sort of higher end of the school, maybe year 11 or 12, you're going to be thinking about that, you know, pretty imminently. So that's definitely food for thought. And our careers teachers and our HE advisors are always there to offer help and support and guidance as well. But it's been really, really good food for thought. And thank you to Sabina for organising it behind the scenes with all the technology going on, and for you, most of all, the audience for joining us tonight. So good night, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. And we are now going to say good night and enjoy the rest of your evening. Okay, goodbye.